So let me just start off with saying that this problem's been going on for 3 years, but it's only started getting worse this year. Also, please forgive me for any mistakes I make, for English is not my first language. I would say something like, for this person's security, I won't say their name. This person has changed their name several times to the point where we don't know if it is her real name or not. So we'll just call her Helen. I don't have all the details, but I will try to get it as accurate as possible. Me and my parents and siblings had come over from Europe to Texas to stay with my ill grandparents at the beginning of the year. Helen worked as my grandparents' maid for 3 years until my grandfather fell ill. Then she told us she was a registered nurse, and she told us she could work for my grandparents. As time went on, there were several things she did that just weren't acceptable. For example, when my grandmother got ill and nearly died, after getting out of the hospital and into a heart attack recovering facility, Helen, during the time in the hospital and at the rehab, had told the staff that she was in charge and no one was allowed into my grandmother's room. When my relatives came in to visit her, Helen told them to leave and they weren't welcome, but they just pushed past her and went to sit with my grandmother. One of my great aunts looked into Helen's past and found out she wasn't a real nurse, and had been faking it the whole time. On Christmas Eve, Helen came to the house when she wasn't supposed to be there, and started to raise hell. One of the things she did was she started screaming in the middle of the night, waking my grandparents up, and telling them that my father was trying to kill her, and that my grandfather needed to get his gun. Now, I know my dad isn't perfect, but he would never hit anyone just like that. Second of all, how did she know my grandparents had a gun? See, my grandparents keep a gun in the house just for emergencies, which was well hidden. No one, but both of my grandparents, knew where it was. They would never tell anyone where it was, or even the fact that they had one. So how the hell did this lady know about it? Anyways, back to the story. My grandfather got up and ran over to my dad. My grandfather had a walking problem, so when he tried to punch my father, he almost face-planted, if my father hadn't caught him. Helen then went on to say how horrible my mother was, and that she was trying to kill her own parents, who she loves. Helen also said some stuff about me. I don't even remember what it was so stupid. This really pissed my mother off, and trust me, you do not want to see her mad. That morning was really tense, due to the fact that my mum had tried to reason with my grandfather to fire her. He declined and actually believed what Helen had told him. As a side note, my grandparents aren't the best people. They didn't pay attention to their kids much, which resulted in the deaths of my mother's 3 brothers. My mother had to go to therapy over several years to finally be at peace around her family. Due to the events on Christmas Eve, it hurt my mother so much that we left from staying in the guest house at my grandparents' house to a small hotel. After several relatives talking to my grandfather, he finally fired Helen, though we didn't come back until a week later. Everything seemed to finally calm down for a while, until Helen kept contacting my grandmother on Facebook and telling her about how we were planning to kill her and steal everything. We got her blocked on Facebook several times, but she kept on making new accounts. The Facebook problem is still going on. The most recent problem I can recall is, after my grandmother's funeral, which was 2 days ago now, Helen called my grandmother from a new number. One of the healthcare providers heard some of the conversation. Yes, it went all to my daughter. No, he didn't. That's what my grandfather was telling Helen about my grandfather's will. A normal person would not ask about my grandfather's will, especially just after he died. My parents are contacting a lawyer, to at least put a restraining order on Helen. If one were to read an article about sociopaths, which my parents did, it would match exactly how Helen acts. We're also going to call the police if she tries to come onto the property again. 2 other healthcare providers have been fired recently due to the fact that they were overdosing my grandmother on her medicine. Ironically, so did a particular someone. We suspect that they had been manipulated by Helen to give them information about my grandmother, because we told them and why it's best not to contact her. Any advice would be helpful, thank you. I might come back to update this once I get more details about what's going on.